Thank you all for joining us for the UBC ARC Sockeye information session. Before I turn it over to Megan, we have a few housekeeping items. The Zoom session will be recorded and posted on the UBC ARC website. If you don't wish to be recorded, submit your questions anonymously or reach out to us directly after the information session. You are welcome to ask questions during the presentation using the Q&A option. However, we have a large amount of time set aside at the end, so we can directly speak to you and have your questions asked then. I'm going to pass things over to Megan to give an overview of our current Sockeye allocation application process now. Megan, over to you.
Great. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay and see the slides? Knock 3 times if it's all fine. Yes, hello. My name is Megan Meredith Lobe. I'm the Humanities and Social Sciences specialist here at UBC Advanced Research Computing. I want to thank you all, first of all, for firing up that Zoom again for one more thing after such a long year. We really appreciate you're all here. We're going to be talking today mainly about the current UBC ARC call for applications for our Sockeye cluster. But I want to start out by talking a little bit about other services available through ARC, how you can get help and advice on a range of digital research conundrums from our excellent staff. And then we're going to go into a bit of depth about the Sockeye HPC cluster, who's eligible to apply, and highlight some changes in how our allocation process has changed over the past few months. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the University of British Columbia Vancouver campus is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam Nation, and the University of British Columbia Okanagan campus is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. And we are grateful to be here and to be presenting to you from these lands. So a bit about ARC in general, for those of you who might not be familiar with all of our services. In a nutshell, we're here to support UBC researchers, both in Vancouver and the Okanagan campuses, with high performance computing and data management in the broadest sense. We support researchers working at all levels and across all disciplines who are engaged in computationally and data intensive research through a range of resources and services. Essentially, ARC helps those on campus whose research workflows are really too big, too complex for a standard computer. If your jobs are taking 4 days and killing your laptop, hey, we're here to help. And researchers whose needs are not typically supported through their departmental IT. We have staff across ARC with experience and familiarity with research in disciplinary areas such as humanities, bioinformatics, chemistry, health, earth and atmospheric sciences, just to name a few. And our services are pretty wide ranging. They include access to the Sockeye HPC cluster, as well as our Chinook object storage platform. We also help researchers access resources on the national platform, Compute Canada, you're probably aware of, as well as connecting you to other research computing resources on campus if they're helpful. If we can't help you, we are very happy to find someone on campus who can. We have dedicated staff to help with security threat assessments, data privacy concerns. We can connect researchers with cloud resources through institutional, commercial, and on the national platform as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also have an instance of the RedCap data capture platform, which is helpful for a number of different disciplines. And ARC staff also run a number of training courses and summer schools throughout the year. We're always happy to discuss training needs with your lab or your department or faculty. And really tying all this together is our consultation service, which is always available to faculty and students and staff. We consult not just on accessing the appropriate digital research infrastructure to support your work, but also in things like grant applications, especially where you'll be purchasing large amounts of compute hardware. And all of the services listed here are within the scope of our consultations. If you want to know how to access Sockeye, how Sockeye might support your research, how you can get started in digital humanities, for instance. The disciplinary support staff that I mentioned earlier are always happy to talk through your research needs and find the best solution for you, whether it's inside ARC or out. Right, so on to the main event. We are all here. And the main event is, of course, talking about Sockeye, our high performance computing system. As you can see here, I won't read through absolutely everything. Sockeye was developed to handle large data workloads, both sort of old-fashioned batch processing for jobs that benefit from parallelization to machine learning algorithms. Sockeye is located on the Vancouver campus. It's also designed to store very high-risk data for those of you who need the type of compute power that's available on say, the national platform, but the nature of your data means it has to stay on-prem, for instance. Sockeye is great for that. And we have, again, at any point during the presentation, if you want to ask questions, especially about technical specs of Sockeye, please just throw something into the Q&A. We've got almost the entire ARC staff is here to answer any question you might have. Right, now, moving on, who can access Sockeye? What exactly can you access? What resources are available? And how do you get started? Which I think is why we're all here today. So before I get too much into the detail about the types of resources we have available, I want to detail some of the changes that we have made since April of 2020, in case some of you have applied for Sockeye prior to that. And then I'll go into some more detail about the type of allocations we have. So since April 2020, we have made a number of changes to the model in order to improve the access for everyone. So allocations now are per eligible UBC researcher, and I'll explain a little bit about what that means particularly. So it's based on the researcher rather than on the project. So what that means in practice is that you can't hold multiple allocations, one allocation per person. We have 3 allocation tiers, standard, priority, and reservation, and I'll again detail those a little bit in a moment. Our standard application process is now ongoing, so you can apply today and get an allocation and start testing your code in a few hours or a couple of days. It's very easy to get access now for eligible researchers whose research workflow does fit onto the system. And we have an online application form which is available through the ARC website. So now, when you're applying for Sockeye, we, again, have these 3 different tiers. So I'll go into a bit of detail about those so that you can always be assured that you're applying for the tier that will best serve your research. So our standard allocation, and that is the one that is ongoing, you can apply at any time throughout the year. You have fair share access to CPU and GPU resources that we have on the system. 5 terabytes of project storage, 5 terabytes of Scratch. And it's a very lightweight review process, an application process. It's reviewed by ARC staff just to ensure that it's a technical fit for the system. So for instance, if you need something like Windows or a web server, then those wouldn't be appropriate for Sockeye because it doesn't handle those types of jobs. Allocations, all allocations expire on June the 30th. Throughout the year, and then you renew through a new application. But again, it's a very lightweight application process, and you can apply anytime. So the priority allocation, which is what is open for you right now, gets you priority access to CPU and GPU resources. So you'll just be able to, your jobs will move a little bit further at the queue. You also have available up to 50 terabytes of project and Scratch space for those larger data sets that need a bit more space. We highly recommend that you have an existing standard allocation prior to applying for the priority allocation. This is just so you can make sure that you have your workflows set up and you're a little bit practiced in the system and you're ensure that you're able to use the system, and we have helped you get over any technical bumps in the road. So we do recommend that you apply for a standard allocation before you apply for a standard. The priority allocation is also reviewed by our DRI Resource Allocation Committee. That's a peer faculty peer review committee. And these allocations are available twice a year. We'll have 2 calls per year. The one open right now, the application date ends on May the 7th. Again, if you have any questions about these, please come and see us. Finally, we have the reservation allocation. And this is for existing standard or priority allocation owners. So you'll have to have a previous allocation in order to apply for the reservation. And these are really ad hoc requests for short-term boosts in compute. So if you have a paper coming up and you need to do a bit of work and get some data analyzed and get some results through quickly for a deadline of some sort, this is a good option. And they're available anytime. In order to get a reservation, you need to reach out directly to ARC staff in order to discuss your needs, and we can work that out with you. So eligibility, and this is a big one. Can you apply for these resources? How do you go about it? So Sockeye was really funded to support research that sort of fell through the gaps of what was available in the national platform. So for instance, early career researchers and new recruits to UBC who haven't had a chance to apply for Compute Canada or national resources yet. Critical research areas such as machine learning and real-time image processing and interactive processing. And also research using sensitive or confidential data that needs to stay on campus. And Sockeye is really designed to help those researchers access increased compute and storage, but still be able to be in compliance with any regulations. Like I said earlier, the priority applications are reviewed by our DRI Resource Allocation Committee. And these 3, the categories of early career researchers, those who are new to UBC, and those with the sensitive and high risk data will receive stronger consideration for the priority allocations. And a bit more around this eligibility. I mentioned earlier the eligible UBC researcher. In order to be in alignment with the VPRI office and how we define who is an eligible researcher, who is eligible to apply for Sockeye, we've taken the definition defined in UBC Research Policy LR2. It's a bit of a mouthful, but you can look it up. So these are the categories of faculty, et cetera, who can apply. The main thing to note here is that you have to be someone who is eligible for research spending responsibility. Can you hold research funds in your own name? And that's really the determining category. If you're a postdoc or a research associate, et cetera, who is not able to hold research funding and therefore not eligible to apply on your own, don't worry. You can have your PI or your supervisor apply as the allocation owner, and you can then be a user and use that allocation. Check with your PI or whomever you work with to ask them if they already have an allocation. Because again, you can only hold one allocation at a time. You need to find out if whoever is sponsoring you already has an allocation. And then you could be added as a user to that allocation. It's very simple. And that's something we're very happy to talk through. If you have any questions about whether or not you're eligible to apply, just please get in touch. And we can talk through and figure out how to get you access either through your supervisor or if you're eligible. So summing up, quick glance. So if you just need fair share access to compute, to GPU resources, we found this is sufficient for most research. Over 90% of the users on Sockeye just have this standard allocation. Our largest users generally have standard allocation. They're good for almost everybody. So that's why we really encourage you just to apply today for a standard allocation, get going with it and see how you get on. The priority access to CPU and GPU, again, has this added layer of review a faculty committee, and is really really for those researchers who are in the earlier stages of their career and needing to establish themselves, or have the nature of their data is such that they're not able to access other resources. For short-term access to additional CPU and GPU, again, this is the reservation. If you've got a deadline coming up, this is a great option. And for storage, we do have our Chinook object storage platform. There's a lot more information about that on our website. We can also answer some questions about Chinook as well after I finish speaking. If you have any questions about that, how Chinook and Sockeye work together, complement one another, we're happy to talk through that. And finally, a bit about our cloud computing, because Sockeye is perhaps not appropriate for everybody. So our cloud computing, it might be a good fit for your research if you require things like virtual machines, Windows applications, web services, those things I mentioned earlier that were not appropriate for the Sockeye system, or very large jobs that require resources simultaneously, interactive computing, etc. We have cloud computing, a number of cloud computing staff at ARC who can sit down and help determine what's the best infrastructure for your data, for your team, whether it's commercial or through Compute Canada. And we can help walk you through the options, look at your data, look at your research workflows, and help you get started on that for those of you for whom Sockeye is perhaps not the most appropriate. But essentially, the big takeaway here is that we want to help you get your research done. And if we can't help, we're going to go and help you find the people who can help you to get that research done. So some important dates, everyone get your pen and pencil out, as the case may be. Again, the standard allocation, apply at any time. You can apply after this presentation. The priority allocations, for those of you who are applying, those are open until May the 7th at 4:59. So you still have a little bit of time. And again, the reservation is open at any time, but you do need to reach out to ARC staff. And we have our details there, arc.support@ubc.ca, for any question you have about Sockeye or Chinook or our cloud computing, or, hey, I really want to do this cool thing and I'm not quite sure how to get started, or do you know anything about this software package? Will it do X for me? We have a number of staff who are amazing and will help answer your questions the best we can. And yes, finally, these are just some links pointing you towards more information about our resources. Again, you can always just Google ARC UBC. We're not the fitness center, we're the advanced research computing one, just in case. I mean, we can help you get fit, but it wouldn't be as good as the other guys. So definitely go with arc.ubc.ca, and there you can find information about Sockeye and Chinook and all the other consultation services that we offer. And I'm going to leave it there. Now we are going to open the floor for questions and discussion. All of the ARC staff is here, so thank you very much, and keep the questions flying.
Thanks, Megan. As Megan mentioned, you're welcome to ask questions in the Q&A below at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom feature. We have had a few questions that were answered during the session, and I'll just go over a few of those because they may be common questions. There was a question about the June 30th for standard or priority allocation. June 30th is the end date of current allocations that are being held unless you applied after April 1st. So we have a bit of an overlap then. If you're applying for priority, you will have till May 7th, as Megan mentioned towards the last slide, to apply. Hopefully that clears it up. There is that overlap, which makes it a little less clear. So someone again asked if their application is accepted tomorrow, does that mean they have it for a full year? They'll actually have it longer than a year. They'll have it till June 30th, 22, so 2022. And the length of a reservation, it is typically 3 weeks. However, you, to get a reservation tier, you usually go through a consult and they'll work with you to make sure it fits your needs. Let's see if there's another question. Just is Sockeye access open source DEM? Oh, it moved, it disappeared. Sorry. There's a, Ryan's already typing, so I'll just leave it.
Good.
You want to read that one? It disappeared from my screen there. Okay, a faculty researcher who has been at UBC for 15 years and does not have confidential data, what is the likelihood of being granted a priority allocation after receiving a standard allocation? I don't know if we have a clear answer as to what the probability of it is. You need to demonstrate that you have a need that the standard could not fulfill. So if you want to reach out to us, you're more than welcome to, but our first take on that would be, are you using a standard? And we'd look at how you're using it, how often, and the consistency. And if that is demonstrating that there's potential for needs beyond that, then we would help you with your application for priority. And that really goes to the DRAC committee that Megan mentioned. And so they're the ones responsible for evaluating that and looking at those needs. So, are there any other questions or anything that the rest of ARC staff wants to flag as something to keep in mind, or any other pieces of information? Oh, another. Okay, there's another question that came up. Currently, I, a graduate student, hold an allocation. Does this mean that I need to contact my PI supervisor to apply for the next cycle of a standard allocation? If you no longer are eligible under our current definition, then yes. However, we do know that there are some exceptions where postdocs and research associates are able to hold funding in their name and they are permitted to apply. We would be working with you if you have a standard and you're moving it over to another allocation. We'll work with you and make sure that we link those in the back end so we can recognize that you've moved over. So feel free to flag in your application that you're most likely filling out on behalf of your PI or supervisor that you have a current allocation and give us that allocation code. If we apply for a priority and our standard is expiring, is there any chance we're left without an allocation at all, or does the standard just get extended? If you have a standard and then you apply for a priority, and if you are not awarded a priority, we will offer you a standard which would be the same allocation code as your current allocation. So we do not leave anyone hanging when they've applied for a priority. They don't get penalized and not get a standard. So we would make sure that you would be able to continue your compute. Just trying to find more of the questions. Could you review again the relationship connection between Chinook and Sockeye? If any ARC staff want to provide the details on that, that's fine, but I'll give a high level overview. We use Globus to connect to Chinook, and you can put it's an object storage platform, you can put your data there. And we flag this because some of the Sockeye, what was extended tier individuals, had larger than 50 terabytes of data set aside. So they would then need to, under a new allocation, get a Chinook allocation and store data there and then move it over to Sockeye when they're needing to run a job. I don't know if that is enough detail, if anyone else wants to add to that.
Elizabeth, you are correct. So in essence, you know, for Chinook, you have to think about Chinook as a kind of a cold storage, right? That's basically storing the data. This is not the data which can be accessed by the compute nodes. And as Elizabeth said, you have to basically have the Sockeye allocation and Chinook allocation and use Globus toolkit to transfer the data between one platform to the computer. I hope it answers the question.
Sure, you definitely did. Thank you, Roman. When will the results of the reapplications be sent? I noticed Matt's typing an answer. I don't know if you want to verbally answer that as well, or I can. There you go.
Yeah, the awards should be, like, the awardees should be notified. I believe we have set June 17th or 18th, but we should, yeah, I think by the end of June is a safe bet. Thank you.
And that's for the priorities. If you are applying for a standard, we will be sending out those soon as we've done reviews this week and a little bit last week. So if you applied for a standard and you already have a standard, unless we reach out to say we need to ask additional information because you've changed your application greatly, you're most likely just getting an extension, and it will show that in the letter you'll receive, which will show that it's June 2022 that your allocation is extended to. If it's a new application for standard, you will get that notice immediately though. It usually takes about 2 days, business days, for us to do the tech and specialist review. Is there a limitation on the number of standard renewals one can get in a year? You can hold one allocation at a time, and we would be, under our current model, asking that around April 2022, you ask for a renewal. So, and then you can continue that as long as you're actually using the allocation and it's needed. We aren't going to penalize people or have a total number. The only time we would start looking at those is, one, if you're no longer a good technical fit for Sockeye and you've indicated that in your application, or if we are actually meeting capacity, and then we're going to have to look at who's onboarded and going forward what that model would look like, but no one would be kicked off or penalized. So if you have a standard, we'd encourage you to apply for another standard for the next year. I'm found ineligible for reapplying. Will the existing data be deleted before considering me finding another researcher to file a new application? I would encourage you to reach out to us so we know which allocation you have. And we are really hoping to work with anyone who is now ineligible on their current, on our old model, or on our new model, but was eligible before in our old. Reach out to us. We will make sure that we flag who your new supervisor or allocation owner is. Then we can include the old allocation code as well and bridge that gap. We don't want anyone to lose their research data by any means, and we don't just arbitrarily delete. You'd have many harassing emails from me before anything like that happens. I don't know, Ryan, Roman, if either of you want to add anything, but you will not find that everything's just deleted ever. That would scare us probably as much as you guys. So no, we're not doing that. Is there any other questions? Just wait a few minutes, see if there's any other questions that pop up. But if you have any questions that come to you while you're filling out the application, feel free to reach out to us. As Megan mentioned, we're almost all watching those tickets, able to answer them as quickly as possible and give you some information to go forward with your application. How do you apply for a Chinook allocation? That's a good question. I'll give you the link to that. And you can always go to our website at arc.ubc.ca to find all of our different applications. Let me just put that also in the question box answered. But yes, you can apply for a Chinook at any time, and it is for a year with a renewal. And again, you hear from us before anything ever happens to those allocations in terms of closing up. Then, any other questions? There is a question about question 29, and I will look towards the systems team because this is one of their questions to explain what you're wanting in that field. It's question 29 on the application form.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. So the question is basically we have a question on the application. It says, describe the bound or limitation for job performance, and they would like us to elaborate on what we mean by a bound. So essentially, we're asking with this question, tell us what the limitation is for your job performance. So if your job is very CPU heavy and CPU is the factor that limits the job's performance, so more CPU equals more performance, then you can tell us that. If it happens to be that you need a lot of memory, but you don't need a lot of CPU, like say you need hundreds of gigabytes per job for memory, you can tell us that. If you have a parallel job that needs to communicate between different nodes, you might have a limitation there on scaling, which is communication between those nodes. Or you might have a job that has a very interesting input-output or I/O pattern, so that your job is actually limited by how fast it can read or write data to storage. And if you're aware of what those limitations are, we would love to hear from them here, and that'll help us assess the suitability of the system for your workload. And I believe there's a question or follow-up on just whether it's just eyeballing it. And yeah, generally speaking, just eyeballing it. The most or as much as you can tell us about it would be great. But if you don't know very much about that, you can just describe sort of what you're trying to accomplish, and we can try to deduce some of those other, try to deduce the workload from there.
Thank you, Ryan. And it looks like Jacob's answering this question. Is it possible to install some software and make it available for all users instead of saving them in our project allocations? And especially those consuming much space. I don't know if Jacob or one of the systems people want to answer that. It's typing an answer though.
Maybe while Jacob types the question, I can just answer it here live. So there's many different ways to install software on Sockeye. So you can install software yourself. If it's just for you, you can install it in your home directory. But if you want to share it with your lab, you might install it in your project directory. Depending on the software, it may take up a lot of space. You have by default a 5 terabyte quota in project for a standard allocation. So that is quite a bit of space. Your software is probably not super big in that regard, but if that's not suitable for you, you can ask us as well to install software. We will generally review all software requests and usually follow through on that and help you by installing the software. There are some cases in which we may recommend you install it yourself, but we can both install software centrally and you can install it either locally in your home directory or also in your project storage.
Yeah, and I typed this up in there, but just to add on to that, some software is licensed commercially. If it's very large, if this is software that your group uses and other projects outside of your own allocation would use, we'd definitely like to look into it. But some software has licensing restrictions that make that not feasible to make available to every research group. I can probably think of an easy one would be if we have a request to install VASP, that would require additional work on our end to make sure that only the groups that have access to that sort of licensed software can actually utilize it. So in that case, we'd probably recommend that it stays installed in just your local project directory for your group.
Thank you, Jacob and Ryan.
However, we can count on our help in tuning up, right? So basically, in terms of the license, we have this model, bring your license, right? We are not providing any, at the moment, the only software which we are entitled to have a license is Gaussian and MATLAB. I think that these are the two which we are entitled to use, and we are using campus-wide licenses for these two pieces of software.
So if there are any other questions, it looks like, let's see if I can open them. Feel free to pop them in there. Otherwise, in a few minutes, we'll go ahead and close the information session. But again, if you do have questions, reach out to us. We're happy to meet. by Zoom or phone or work through email. Okay, it doesn't look like any more questions. Thank you all for attending today. As we mentioned earlier, this will be posted. Oh, another one, more specific one. Let me pull that one up. Given that they're more specific one with regard to compute nodes, our jobs land, GPUs in particular. Given that there are multiple different models listed in the catalog, last time we had to do benchmark something, we had to log the model as part of the job. Is there any more controlled way or ability to select what we land on? Ryan?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So we do have two different models of GPU on Sockeye. They're very, very similar, but the difference between those two models will be that one of them has 16 gigabytes of VRAM and the other one has 32 gigabytes of VRAM. And there is an option you can provide to the scheduler when submitting your jobs to say which one of those two you would like to run on. I believe it's GPU_mem, and there's two values you can select for that. One would be 16 GB and the other one would be 32 GB, and that will guarantee that your jobs land on either the 16 gigabyte VRAM GPUs or the 32 gigabyte VRAM GPUs.
Yeah, and there's also one other option along similar lines if you're concerned about processor architecture. Since we have two different CPU architectures, you can also use the flag CPU_ARCH and either specify Skylake or Cascade Lake, and that will allow you to select which of the two CPU types you'd like.
And I will add that finally, if you are very eager and you would like any particular compute nodes, you can always request the specific node. In a select statement, if you type host equal and the name of the host, the scheduler will tie up this job to this particular node, and it will dispatch the job to the execution whenever this particular node is available. So look at the PBS manual, select host equal as well.
So if there aren't any other questions at this moment, we'll go ahead and end the information session. I want to thank all of you for attending and for using Sockeye. Please continue to reach out to us. I want to thank Megan for presenting, and Jacob, Roman, Ryan, and Matt for answering questions on the spot when I forced you to. So thank you very much. And again, thanks for attending. Have a great day.